Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fuck Wellness. I'm Mallory.
I'm Lara.
And I'm McKenna.
And we are on to our third episode of our month unpacking and looking at religion and faith. We've had, I think, two really solid episodes, but I'm super excited for today. We have Joy Castro-Wehr on the podcast, and she's going to talk about lots of things, but I think has a very unique perspective on our topic today, which I'm super excited to hear about. So welcome to the pod, Joy.
Thank you.
I was hoping maybe we could start by you giving a little bit of background on yourself, anything you would like the listeners to know.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so fun. It's so fun to be on this on the pod, as you say.
On the pod.
So my name is Joy. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'll just throw that in too. I am calling in from Somerville, Massachusetts. And I recently moved here from Washington, D.C. So kind of getting used to being in a new stage of life as a student.
And what
freshly.
and what are you doing right
Very
now?
Freshly. Yeah. So I just started out at Harvard Divinity School. I'm in my, I guess starting my fourth week already, which is kind of wild. I feel like time is going really fast. So I'm a Master's of Divinity student is sort of my full degree is the Master's of Divinity track. It's a 3-year program, and it's a very common question that comes up. Like, what do you do with a Master's of Divinity? I think sort of like studying religion is sort of ambiguous in and of itself. And then especially that word, like divinity, is an especially undefined word. Like it's not even a master's of religious studies. It's a master's of divinity, which is sort of a double layer of time. So
okay, wait,
the way that
pause,
I've sort of
really
thought
fast.
about
It cut out for a second.
You know,
okay. Yeah, just go back a little bit. It was being chaotic for a second. You're good. Just go back a little bit and then restart.
Okay. So the way that I've thought about my program, the Masters of Divinity track, is that there's 3 sort of different directions that you can go with. I mean, there's infinite directions you can go in with this degree, but the 3 sort of most common tracks are there's sort of the ordination track, or sort of a congregational or community leader direction in whatever faith tradition someone belongs to. There's sort of the community organization or NGO direction. So if folks are interested in sort of faith-based work, but maybe it's political, maybe it's for a certain social justice cause, that's the second bucket. And then the third is scholarship and academia, and for folks who are interested in pursuing PhDs or becoming professors or teachers themselves in religion or comparative religion. So those are sort of the 3 different, I would say, most common directions that people with a Master of Divinity will pursue. And I won't try to say right now which of those 3 I'm most interested in.
I'm on the edge of my seat right now.
I know, it's like unfair. I just set myself up to have to disclose. Yeah, this is the moment. It's like the defining moment for my next 3 years, right?
We can make some pro and cons lists together.
I know at some point I'll need to, but as with all things, I'm sure my understanding of what the heck I'm doing will evolve. I'll say sort of the reason I got into the degree program, got into as in like what I'm interested in this program, is with the sort of community leadership or sort of faith tradition leader sort of pathway. So I'm interested in congregational leadership and ordination and chaplaincy, which often sort of entails some form of ordination. Doesn't have to, but sometimes will go hand in hand. So anyways, that's sort of a broad overview of the Masters of Divinity curriculum, sort of like the 3 components, I guess. But you asked what, I guess, Divinity School is, and within the school itself, there are the Masters of Divinity students like myself. There's also a track called the Master of Theology, which is a separate sort of distinct program that has a lot of overlap with the Divinity curriculum and requirements, but it's a little bit more specific to a particular theological question that somebody wants to pursue. So it's a bit more academic. There's not the same sort of clinical or field placement requirements. It's a lot more sort of classroom and scholarship heavy work. The degree is a little bit shorter, but ironically, it's what people do before pursuing PhDs, or at least that's generally what folks do. So it's kind of like, okay, you get this degree in 2 years, but only because we know you have 5 or 6 plus more years left with us. So there's a collection of, they're called MTSs sort of in the school. There's the MDiv and then the MTS. And then, yeah, lastly, I don't know how much detail you'd like about Divinity School,
No,
but this is like the breakdown. Also know that I'm just now learning about these categories now that I'm at Divinity School. There's a pretty large contingent of PhD students at the Divinity School as well. Lots of people are interested in teaching religion or becoming, lecturers and authors and whatnot on a particular theological question. And what's interesting at Harvard is we have a 1-year program called the Special Student Program, which invites professionals from different degree fields and different vocational tracks to come to the Divinity School to study for 1 year. And I don't know, because that's not the track I applied to, sort of what the particularities are, but people arrive with a question they have about how sort of they want divinity and theological studies to inform the field that they're coming from and plan to return to. So we have an interesting sort of mixture in the classroom of people of a really wide variety of ages and questions that they're grappling with. Things sort of, strictly speaking in terms of professions that they're coming to the classroom with, and a pretty wide variety of experiences, which is really interesting. It's really fun.
I'm feeling so grateful that you're here to offer any sort of semblance of like knowledge on religion, honestly, because I feel like we've just been kind of like, this is what we think, and that's great. And we know some things. Mal probably knows the most of, like, his history.
I was a religion minor in college.
Nice.
My
cool.
fun fact of the day.
Yes. But it's just kind of funny that, I don't know, it's cool to kind of learn about that part of, school, because I don't feel like it's ever been explained. Like I see similar titles and I'm like, my brain just goes, oh yeah, like religion. And then I just like close that, which obviously, like, it's so, it sounds, there's so much work to do. And it sounds like there's all these different cool things that it can impact, society. So I'm interested in hearing more about it.
Joy, I was wondering if maybe you could take us back a little bit and we could hear about the evolution of what led you to get this degree. Like, because I assume that it wasn't just like a sudden, maybe it was, but I think I would love to hear, like, going back a little bit, like, what are the things that made you think that this is something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, that's a good question that I'm still sort of thinking about.
Question.
I feel like, my answer to all of these questions is like, stay tuned in the next 3 years.
We'll have a recap episode when you're done with your degree.
And my answers will be like completely opposite
Totally
from what
different.
I said now. No, it's a good question though. So I guess there were a lot of different experiences that I had in my life that informed ultimately my decision to pursue this particular degree, and specifically sort of at this school, at this program. I didn't know that those experiences were leading to Divinity School until only maybe 2 years ago, in part because I didn't know that Divinity School was a thing. I didn't know that it existed and that entire institutions were built, or schools within larger institutions were dedicated to the study of religion, but divinity, like I think that sort of semantics in the word divinity is important. So it's not just questions of theology or religion, but really sort of the broader sort of sense of people who are grappling with stuff that's hard to put a name on. And so we call that divinity. So anyways, I didn't know that those schools existed until 2 years ago when I was doing a fellowship with an organization called Sojourners, which is a very unapologetic evangelical, I would say very progressive magazine and nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. And I similarly studied religion in undergrad. I was a religion major just by accident. I took a lot of religion classes and just continued to find that those were the most interesting classes on my roster for each semester. So that was kind of the first thing I would say that led me to divinity school, was just paying attention in undergrad to what sorts of papers I enjoyed writing and what prompts were exciting to be thinking about. And I went to a liberal arts school, so I took a lot of classes in a pretty wide variety of sort of disciplines, and I like had a lot of clarity that I really wanted to go into a humanities field, and I wanted to read a lot and write a lot, and was sort of trying to figure out, well, if I'm going to be reading a lot, what can I tolerate reading a lot about? I knew in undergrad that I wanted to pursue some kind of master's, but I wasn't sure what at the time. So figuring out that I could read and think a lot about sort of these questions of religion was really helpful in deciding to come to divinity school. Definitely the fellowship year working with a religious organization. Sojourner's mission is to do sort of political messaging to the evangelical community, the national evangelical community, around social justice issues. And I had never seen religion, particularly this like very particular sort of form of expression of Christianity, used in such a way to kind of get people rallied behind different issues that in my mind I didn't think were sort of issues that the church cared about or could care about. For example, environmental or racial justice and voting rights issues. So that was another sort of point that got me interested, is sort of thinking about like, how does religion percolate into other areas of our life, that whether or not we ourselves identify as religious or identify with any particular faith tradition or belief system, we're all sort of being impacted by people who do believe those things. So it's worth it to take the time to get to understand what those individuals are thinking, because that impacts how people vote and treat one another and talk about one another and write and think and all of that. So so those are sort of the two main points. I guess I would say the third and maybe most important is, I'm trying to think about how I want to articulate this, but sort of paying attention to what parts of myself I wanted to nurture in an academic environment, but that I wanted to sort of come out as, the way I was as a person in the world. Like, I was interested in getting a master's degree for academic and sort of, job related questions. But I think more importantly, what I wanted to do was think about the type of person I hoped to be, and then find a program that would sort of push me through a process that created that type of person. And I was looking around last year and sort of noticing that the people that I admired, not everyone, but a lot of people that I admired were people who had done this sort of degree. And so that was a big part of my decision too, was looking to mentors and role models, and kind of just deciding that, the vocational track might be a little bit ambiguous with the Masters of Divinity in a way it wouldn't have been with, something a little more sort of directed in a professional direction, maybe. But that it was worth committing to that for sort of the self-development process of it. Yeah.
I love that outlook on because it does feel like, when you think like, I'm going to get my master's or I'm going to get my PhD, it's not like, what will that make me as a human after? It's more of like, how hireable will I be after that? So I think that that's a really good way of thinking about that, because everything that we do, like work, school, relationships, everything, it's like shaping us to be someone else, I guess, in a little bit of time.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I think that's cool, because I don't think, like, not to like throw shade at anyone, but I don't know if people are like, I'm gonna become a tax lawyer because of who it's gonna make me after that. Like, you know.
Yeah.
Wait, I want to kind of ask, so sojourner, what's it called?
Yeah, sojourners.
Sojourners.
Mhm.
That's a really hard word for
It
my
is.
mouth. Whoa.
It is for everyone. It's okay.
Okay. So because I looked it up and I was like, evangelical Christianity. Like there's definitely a like type of person that I imagine when I think of that
Mm.
like sector of religion. But then I looked at the articles and I was like, okay, like we're talking about Roe, we're talking about like, what is this? It was kind of like, it was a weird clash. That must have been really cool to, you said you were a writer there?
I I was working with the Office of the President, so I was doing a lot of administrative
Okay, okay.
sort of events planning. Some other fellows were writing for them. I was not,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
That's a cool thing. I
Yeah,
liked looking that up.
yeah. It is really interesting. That sort of clash that you're describing, I think, is
Mhm.
it's certainly very how do I want to say this? It felt like a clash to me when I first got there. And
Yeah,
when I was introduced to the organization through the application process for this fellowship.
really.
Like I, saw the fellowship advertised somewhere. And so similarly, like what you did, I looked up the organization and was reading about it to see if it was the type of place that I would want to possibly work at. And admittedly went into it with a lot of skepticism. I don't identify as an evangelical Christian. And so kind of thinking like, well, is this even the type of place that would want me? Like, am I allowed to not be like you to be here?
Mhm.
Which I know is sort of a presumption that I had about evangelical communities, was that if I didn't identify as such, then I wouldn't, the doors wouldn't even be open for me. And not only that, but I thought maybe I would feel actively uncomfortable. Like, even if I were invited into the fellowship program, would I be in such disagreement with the things that we were talking about as an organization, sort of just on a values level, that, I wouldn't want to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And definitely over the year that I was there, I wouldn't say that I changed my position in any way as identifying as not an evangelical Christian. I don't think I became any more Christian or any more evangelical, or even a bit evangelical, because I wasn't at all going into it.
Yeah.
But it was a really helpful sort of experiment for me in seeing how those questions of, what you mentioned, questions around reproductive justice and care and access, and again, environmental or racial justice issues actually aren't always categorically, mutually exclusive with an evangelical Christian identity. Um, and that was a really, I think, useful and important thing for me to experience and be exposed to. I think at any point in my life and in history, but especially in 2020 when I began my fellowship, because it was right around the presidential election and there were just a lot of sort of national narratives around religion and the religious right. So it was an interesting time to be in a religious space.
This is a really silly question and it feels embarrassing that I don't know this, but I don't know what evangelical means. Like the difference. I'm feeling
Yeah.
everyone's just looking at me. I'm feeling nervous. I had to ask that question.
I'm looking because I'm like, Joy, take it away.
Yeah.
You got it, girl.
I'm like, can someone else help me? I know I'm like supposed to know these things. Well, actually, I think it's interesting. Okay, first of all, not a silly question. I actually think it's a really important question. And the fact that none of us, myself included, have like a straightforward answer it's interesting. I think that that's kind of my understanding of the word evangelical as it's used in America right now, is that maybe nobody really knows what the original intent of that identity was. And it's also something that's evolved a lot over over different decades. And there is sort of a history, kind of a long history to the evangelicals in the country, and that's kind of a different thing. But in this contemporary moment, I think that I won't try to talk about anything that I don't know for sure is true. But what I do understand is that evangelical is used, I think, for some communities as an identifying point about themselves, to describe a certain level of maybe commitment and intensity to a particular way of viewing their Christian beliefs, and maybe how that relates to others, and what they might sort of think non-evangelicals should perhaps should believe. Maybe that's like one way of thinking about it, is it's kind of this commitment to, we hear the sense of like evangelizing, and it's this sense of like, oh, I'm going to tell you that you should convert, or the way. And I think there's maybe a glimmer of truth to that in some particular cases. I don't think on like a national scale that's, I think it's perhaps a bit of a misnomer, and is used sort of more as a political way of describing a block of people who are Christian, but might have a lot of different, sort of be on a very different sort of, be in different places about what that means to them, and how they think that relates to the world outside of their sort of Christian sphere. I think what I learned is it's really hard to describe.
Well, you also just gave a beautiful answer. I feel like I was like, yes, I'm with this. I understand now.
Cool. The one other thing about even because of the way the word has been, again, I won't presume to sort of be the expert on what evangelical means in America right now, but I do know that it carries a lot of political and religious, depending on who you ask, stigma. That might be weight in like a beneficial way for a cause, but it also might be stigma in a really reactionary, like finger pointing kind of way. It feels like evangelical is a very fraught sort of word, and has been for some time. And so something that Sojourners, for example, as one organization that's engaged in this kind of work, is doing, is they're trying to, and I think it's safe to speak on behalf of the organization here, because this is something that they'll very explicitly say in their mission statement, is reclaim what it means to be an evangelical Christian, in so much as the way they want to message Christianity to the world is by doing the things that Jesus talked about doing, and not by saying the things that Jesus said without backing any of that up with action. So I think there's sort of like a correction that, or depending on who you ask, of course, if you ask me, it's a bit of a redirection, maybe in a more positive direction of figuring out what different people would use different words, but the gospel or the scriptures or Jesus, or what sort of the way is, and moving forward based on how we sort of live our lives, to be consistent with those teachings of peace and justice, and equity, and those sorts of things. And that to be evangelical is about demonstrating to the world what it looks like to be a Christian, and not telling people that they should be, or a Christian maybe period, or that they should be any kind of Christian. So it's really about sort of putting action back into the word and making it more active. So that's what Sojourners does, and other evangelical groups. There aren't many others that I know of who are engaged in that sort of reappropriation process, but there are some. So I don't know. That was a very long answer. I hope there was something there that was like a little helpful.
That was perfect.
Joy, I'm curious about what are some of the questions in this space that you're most curious about looking at in your program, or like what kind of questions in your undergrad degree were so interesting to you that you were like, this is something I would want to study and read about and write about in the future. Because I know like I had that experience in my religion minor, and I had a very similar experience to you as I just started taking religion classes and they were like my favorite. And so I just kept taking them. And then I ended up being like, oh, I have enough credits to have a religion minor. It wasn't like I went into college with that intention. And for me, like I was so curious about the historical Jesus and like where history and like historical texts like overlapped with the gospels, and that's kind of what I ended up doing my final paper on. But I was really curious like what areas of religion, and I know you also said you studied sociology too, so what kind of things were you really interested in and are interested in looking at in your program? And this doesn't have to be academic. These can also be just like questions about the world and community and etc.
This also feels, just to very quickly piggyback, it feels like your program is maybe, producing more of like okay, let me rephrase. Do you feel like your program is like also shaping your beliefs or like helping you kind of figure out what those beliefs are and how you want to engage with them? Or do you feel like you're there to kind of just learn, like just to piggyback off of Mel? Because I feel like there could be more of like an intersection there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I can answer that question first, which is that right now I feel like I'm in the process of having my religious identity, among other parts of my identity, just like shaken down and deconstructed and questioned. And I'm in week 3 of classes. So I think by the time I like get through this program, I'm curious. What I'm predicting will happen is that right now the academics are sort of deconstructing my sort of personal beliefs, because I and my cohort and other people in this program are just being exposed to such a high quantity of new information about how religion and spirituality functions in the world that it's just impossible to be sure about anything anymore. Like, I just feel like I have this sense, again, in less than a month of school, that, everything I thought to be true might be, but it also might not be. Or where did it come from? And why did I have that belief in the first place? And should it be deconstructed? All of those sorts of like identity crisis questions. The program is cultivated or sort of curated in such a way that the academics are meant to intersect with the personal and the sort of what you're talking about, that sort of like the introspection that we could be going through over the course of our studies versus the academics. There's a lot that's sort of integrated throughout the coursework that, demands personal reflection and whatnot. So what I predict will happen is over the next 3 years, I'll probably start to rebuild my sense of religious identity. And I would hope by the time I'm done, not that that is ever a completed process, but I would like to get to a place where I'm sort of stable enough with that identity that I can then sort of present that to the world as, I'm still being formed, but here's what I know to be true about myself right now. And hopefully that's helpful for finding a job, but also it's just hopefully it's helpful because, that's why I want to go through this program, is to learn about myself more and learn about myself in relationship to others in the world. So if it were just broken down and never built back up, I don't know how much good that would do either. So that's the first, your question, I guess the second question. And then Mallory, I guess I'm thinking about your question, and what's interesting is sitting in our classroom on the first day of class where everybody in my cohort was together. The professor asked how many people thought that you were going to study religion in undergrad because you knew you wanted to do a program like this after. And nobody raised their hand. And then the professor said how many people accidentally started taking religion classes and without knowing it had a minor or a major, and then figured out that divinity school existed, applied and came here, all because of some weird sort of circumstance that just worked out that you didn't even know, was a possibility. And everybody raised their hand. So it's an interesting sort of phenomena with the study of religion that I don't want to say never, because I don't think that's true for everyone, but at least within my cohort, all of us were here because we were studying something else and noticed that we were being pulled in a particular direction, and quite literally all accidentally got involved in this program, without that was the intention all along. So it is kind of an interesting thing, just question to ponder why that is. But yeah,
to answer that, I feel like it's life. It's because they're like just life questions. You know what I mean? Like I feel like the part that made it so interesting to me was that it felt like all of the taboo stuff that we're not supposed to talk about with like religion, like were the stuff we were talking about in class. And it felt like it intersected so directly with like questions of life that you think about every single day. Like, when I die, do I just die, or does something else happen? Or, like really like serious things that you may like think about when you're alone, but then you actually have a class where you're like, I get to talk about this today. So I feel like that's maybe my initial theory, just hearing that rhetorical question you just asked that didn't really need an answer, but that was my attempt.
But I feel like the word, like, we all accidentally got into this major. It's so funny because, like, yes, you did all accidentally do that. And like Mallory, maybe you accidentally got like your minor in religion, but it's like that you all did that for the most like reasonable reasons. Do you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't an accident. You all got there for the actual right reasons. Whereas like someone like me,
interest,
I'm like,
you mean?
Well, just because it's like more genuine that you even got there. Do you know what I mean?
Like rather than your chemical engineering, is that what you're comparing?
I'm like,
it to?
I accidentally got my degree, or like if you came from like a line of 5 people who went to Harvard Divinity School and you were 8 years old saying, I'm gonna go to Harvard Divinity School. Like, I feel like that is less of like, that would be more of an accident. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Like, yes, everyone is there raising their hand because it's like, that is actually where you're supposed to be because of how your life has been shaped,
Totally. I think it speaks more to sort of the, not to overuse this word, but like the scripts that we're fed when we're younger and sort of growing up and going through school or high school or undergrad. If you go, like sort of like what we're supposed to do and what like possibilities maybe are available to us. And so I totally, I hear what you're saying. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense. And even just thinking about the way I answered the initial question is like, it's like, you're right. It's not, Mallory, to the point of your answer, like, it's not an accident that people want to talk about, like what happens to us when we die, or like, my friend's dog just died. What do I say to them? Like, that's actually a really reasonable, possibly the most reasonable type of question to be asking. And so, that's so interesting. No, I completely, I'm just like having my mind blown about why I'm here. I'm like, oh my God, we're all wrong. This isn't an accident.
That's the theme of your life right now, Joy. It's like,
everything is falling apart in like a good way. I just don't know anything. And it's so cool. I guess my takeaway, like, if that's true, then my takeaway from that is I just feel extremely like grateful then to have had the sort of material and like resource and circumstances to support me to be able to sort of indulge that like line of thinking and questioning. Because I think sometimes the reason that people maybe don't get into that, I mean, maybe there are just genuine interests that people have. Like, if I had been better at science in college, maybe I would have like, stuck with biology. But I think like, it's such a, I guess I'll just, for lack of a better word, it feels like such a treat to have been able to sort of be supported in indulging those curiosities and to be, to hear from friends and family, like, it's reasonable to ask those things. There's actually jobs that you can find out there that allow you to ask those questions with people and support people through those questions, and you can get paid for it. Like, not that that's what it's all about, but sort of for that like rational part of myself and, understandably people that, care about me sort of in talking about, why are you making this investment into this program? It's like, well, there's actually like people want and to ask those questions with other people who are thinking about them. So yeah, I guess that's my takeaway. I feel really grateful to be supported, to be able to do the thing that like actually just kind of is really human. Yeah, I don't even, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, those, I feel like the questions that are posed in like a religious minor setting, or like a religious study setting, or a divinity school, whatever, those questions, like maybe they aren't really questions that like I've really fronted with, or like McKenna, we're kind of like not really studying this stuff yet, but like when certain things happen in your life, maybe that is when you would have those questions, and then it'd be like, someone help me, like someone who knows more about this, please help me. And this is just like a side little story, but my cousin, they went to Columbia Divinity School, and then they went and worked as a hospital chaplain in Bellevue in New York City. And I feel like that is like talking about like a dog's death. Like, what do you say to your friend when, someone they love has died? And that is a big thing that happens in hospitals, and that is a big thing that I think hospital chaplains deal with. And I just like, yeah, you absolutely can go out and have like careers in this, even though it's maybe something that is not like super, I don't know, I think it's kind of rare, so people don't really think of it as maybe a path, but then it's also something that you're not really confronted with until you have that loss, and then you're like, wait, who? And then you have, this person is presented to you being like, I have this skill set, let me help you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I think I want to think about whether or not this is true. I think it is. Yeah. The only before I speak,
I'm gonna tell you it's not actually.
It's a
A
lie.
live fact check.
I am hearing the word chaplain a lot now that I'm in this program. I think that before I started this program, that I knew about the word because my dad is a minister, so I like had the word sort of percolating in my mind, but I didn't know exactly what it looked like. The only other people, just to your point, that I think I ever spoke with, because I sort of said going into this program, oh, I want to get into hospital chaplaincy, that's what I'm interested in. And the only people who knew what that meant were people who had losses or diagnoses in their families where a chaplain was present. And just kind of to your point of, and I don't think that's no one's fault. It's not maybe necessarily, it's not categorically a bad thing or a structural failing, but there is this sense of like, we don't talk or think about chaplains or chaplaincy really, really broadly speaking, like as people who offer emotional and or spiritual support in any religious tradition or not, like even to people, humanist chaplains do that work, sort of unaffiliated with any religious group. But just to the point of like, we don't even think about that really as a form of support that's actually very it's very professionalized. I mean, there's like a whole board of chaplaincy certification that you have to go through to be a hospital chaplain, and really the way that you learn about that is through having someone present in something that goes on in your life. And then suddenly it's like this whole other universe of support and a type of support that we don't think about until you need it. So I think that's a really good point.
Maybe this isn't a conversation you've had as a cohort, but have you gotten a sense so far of like what percentage of your cohort falls under an organized religion and like identifies with that versus is just there because they're like curious about these questions, but maybe isn't particularly religious? I'm just curious about that because, and also McKenna, not to call you out here, but I'm sitting here being like, I think McKenna, you would love this program.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. It's not a call out. I thought it was going to be something scary.
No. So I feel like I'm going to tell Joy, but McKenna is, well, for lack of a better term, a psychic medium. And I feel like, McKenna, you are asking these questions all of the time, but you wouldn't identify yourself as a religious person. But that doesn't mean that these questions aren't things that you in your like, you know, spirituality aren't questioning all of the time.
Right. And I think that kind of back to what Lara was saying, and we were just talking about, like, I think that, like Joy, you said, like, these are questions that are just human questions that I think that we are actually naturally kind of having from a young age. I think, you know, as we grow up and as we like develop, we are, you know, figuring out like, you know, what is death, or what are, you know, these different kind of big life questions. And I think that this sound like your program, no matter kind of where you branch off, sounds like it's another kind of pillar and community that we need to kind of help people support people through these questions or loss, or even sometimes like celebration, or, you know, any sort of change. I think that along with all these different other kind of people, I don't know, it feels like a very beautiful thing to kind of have different perspectives from kind of all these different people who are caring for us, essentially.
Yeah. I think so. I see that reflected in my program, certainly, and in other programs too. I don't want to sound like I'm only, you know, saying that, certain dynamics exist here. But yeah, I'm just trying to think about sort of the arrangement of people in my cohort, and sort of what, I don't know what the sort of the number breakdown would be, but just based on the people that I've spoken with, you know, anecdotally over the past couple of weeks, it seems to me that maybe a third-ish of the people I've spoken with are there because they have a faith tradition that they belong to, and they want to study that faith tradition because they belong to it. And it's like what they're, there to study, there to develop and sort of grow personally. And that study and that personal growth are intertwined and sort of one and the same, because what they're studying tracks closely to their own religious identity. I would say that's probably a third, if not less, of the people that I've spoken with. And the rest are people who, I mean, I can just use myself as an example, have a religious history and maybe had a religious upbringing, but the questions that I'm curious about and sort of the things that I'm hoping to study, like, I could push them through the filter of my own religious background and experience, but that's not really the exercise that I am here to do. Like, I guess that brings up a bigger question too, of sort of the difference between like the academic and the personal. When you're talking about studying religion and spirituality, it's kind of hard to distinguish those things a lot of times. And that's an active conversation that we're having in classrooms a lot around, you know, the etiquette around that, in just understanding that for some people, something is an academic question. And for another, maybe their classmate sitting next to them, it's like, you know, you're talking about my prayer practice, or, you know, the way that I greet someone in my faith tradition. And to you, it's this interesting anthropological thing that you're mulling over. But to me, it's, you know, how I address somebody that I respect in my tradition, for example. So that's kind of an interesting tension, I guess, that sort of comes up in that environment, where for some people it's about their religion, and for the rest of, I don't want to say for the rest of us, it's not like it's creating an us or them, but there is this sense of a lot of people are here to ask questions that don't directly relate to their religious upbringing, in large part because I think a lot of people aren't coming from religious backgrounds in my program. That was one of the that varies from back to the point of sort of describing divinity schools. They all have very different sort of histories and, contemporary tracks, and the type of students that they attract based on those curriculums vary quite a bit. And some divinity schools definitely attract the more sort of religious, perhaps almost pious or actively engaged in a religious practice, and others not so much, or they attract a combination.
Was that a difficult kind of process for you to decide where you wanted to apply and then ultimately go?
It was a pretty clear process for me where I wanted to apply. I had really strict criteria, personally, with what I was comfortable with. I knew that if I was very explicitly and financially and, in every way, all of my resources will be devoted to this institution for the next few years, and then I will have that name attached to a degree. And I was really clear that I wanted to feel comfortable with that affiliation, from a religious kind of teaching standpoint. And that frankly whittled down the number of divinity schools that I felt excited to apply to. It's not that there aren't a lot of really wonderful sort of, I would say, progressive leaning divinity schools that are doing a lot of work to sort of bridge religious studies into the world in a way that's like advancing justice. I think that's the explicit mission actually of a lot of divinity schools now. But I was pretty clear with the level of sort of student engagement in matters that were outside of religious studies that I wanted. So yeah, the actual decision was really challenging just once I, had a couple of options. But just for the standard reasons of, what city do I want to live in? Where do I have more friends? And, what school is prettier? I mean, there were all sorts of those kinds of just like lifestyle questions that didn't really even have to do anything with the academics.
When you so it's your like second week of class, or like your like first week of class, kind of, or no, let's go second week of class.
Put yourself there. Really
Yeah.
get into it.
It's like, it wasn't too long ago. I'm there.
Yeah. Do you because I'm trying to put myself back in the role of when I was a student. It's kind of actually difficult because I blocked a lot of it out, but when you're walking to class, getting like some food with your classmates, trying to like create friendship and connection, like I feel like with certain things and certain forms or like funnels of study, it's pretty easy to not be like, hey, Joanne, like, what's your life like? But instead, okay, this is actually like a really, really hard question for me to get out of my brain. Okay. So
I feel like we're doing some role play right now.
Yeah,
I'm kind of nervous.
Workshopping some bits.
We kind of are in my brain because did y'all watch Gilmore Girls?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm in like 5 different directions. She went to Harvard, right? No, she went to Yale.
Yeah.
That was like the big thing. Was she went to Yale.
Take it
Holy
back.
shit. Okay, but she did tour Harvard. She toured Harvard. So that is like in my brain of like, I've never myself been to Harvard, but like, that's like what I'm seeing, like little like Joy walking down the pathway, going to class. And then you get to class. And then all of like the kids in your class are like standing outside. And it's like, you're trying to like talk to people, but it's like, do you talk about like your classes? Do you talk about like what wild things you just learned like yesterday? Or is it like, hey, what do you like to like make for breakfast? Like I feel like it's so hard to like form a different question when you are all learning like such groundbreaking things together. You know what I mean? Like all of your worlds, because this is what your professors I'm sure are trying to do right now, or like shattering right now. Do you even try and like make small talk about breakfast, or do you just go straight to like,
Is there a God?
Yeah, like I think that happens when we die. Like, what kind of conversations are you talking about? I want to be there with you second week.
Laura, thank you for setting the scene for that. I feel like
You're
it was
welcome.
really crucial for this question to set the scene.
We are
You're
all
welcome.
there.
Sorry, that was difficult.
No, it's a great question. Yeah, all of my senses are like in that setting now too. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm like really immersed in this scene. Yeah, God, it's such a good question. Honestly, it's such a good question, and it's so hard to answer because what we talk about on a given day so depends on kind of who's present in the circle and kind of like how well we know each other. I think, okay, here's a thought. Something that I noticed really early on is that there's this sort of paradox maybe built into how we talk to one another as classmates, where usually when you don't know someone very well, you do the small talk thing until you become friends. And now you've established this like closeness and trust. And then we'll start talking about things like, hey, do you believe in God? You know, but like, I think what I'm noticing or what I noticed, I guess, in week 1 or 2 is that like the commonality that we all had was the content of our courses, which just in the nature of our courses are these really intense like questions of cosmology and like God and like how the universe works and how like religion functions in society, which is in like everything. And so what we would jump to talking about first were those really big questions. So we were just like the weirdest forms of small talk where like until we got to know each other, we would talk about those big things. And now I finally feel like I know people in my cohort well enough a month in to be able to say like, hey, where did you get that bagel? You know, like I want to talk about like normal life stuff. Like we're human beings too, you know, like this isn't just like, but so yeah, I guess that's my definitive answer is we're talking, at least in my circles, my social circles, we're doing reverse getting to know you, where we started with the big stuff because that was the common stuff. And now as we begin to trust each other more, it's like, okay, we're on the same page here. We both like to talk about like the historical Jesus, for example, like that comes up again and again. Like we're on the same page with some like really important stuff, you know, like now let's go like, you know, hang out in a park and do what like people our age do. And I think that, yeah, I mean like, you know, we're like I've only just now like started to get to know where people are from and like, you know, that kind of thing. So I guess that's my answer is we're like the worst small talkers ever at Divinity School. Like nobody knows how to not ask the big questions right away.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So I would say that's the answer. It's interesting too, when I was describing at the very beginning of our conversation, those different tracks, those different degree tracks within the Divinity School. That's another thing that people talked about, especially right at the beginning was, well, which are you an MDiv or an MTS? And everybody asked that all the time. We still do because it's hard to memorize who's who in a pretty big cohort. It doesn't really matter. Like we're all going to be here for at least 2 years together. And then some of us will have an additional year. But I think I get the sense that people are asking that one, because it's like an easy small talk question and it's like gets the conversation rolling. If you don't know someone and you're, you know, next to each other in class. But I think too, it's kind of revealing. It's not always the case across the board, but I have found whether or not you're there to do the divinity degree or the theology degree, like says a little bit about what questions you're asking and what you're interested in. Not that both people can't have academic interests and then, you know, overlapping kind of sort of personal questions or questions related to, you know, applying their degree outside of the academy. But it says a little bit, I think, for me at least, that's why I ask it, is it's like, oh, you're thinking about leading a nonprofit and you want to study religion and how that might matter in this sector versus like I'm talking to somebody who wants to be a PhD in what we're studying in this class. Those are just different kinds of ways of being, and it's just helpful data, I guess, getting to know someone. So yeah, That's kind of
That's
what
so
the first
cool.
couple of weeks looked like. We're more normal now. That's making it sound really like stilted. And in reality, it's like a lot of just like, I don't know.
Even when you said the academy, I was like, what a cool club. Like, it just,
I know it's so hideous. I've used the word academy so many times. I've never
No,
used the
I
word
love
that
it.
much
I'm
before.
just picturing you guys just like, eating lunch, like just ponder, like any movie scene at like one of the big schools, like with like a, what did they call them in high school? Like a seminar, a
Mhm.
somatic seminar. Is that what it's called?
And,
A
seminar?
Socratic.
A Socratic.
Socratic. I like a
There
somatic
it
though.
is.
That would be way
Yeah,
better.
I mean,
That's
that's
like
like great too.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
That's
just,
what
it
they're
sounds
doing
so fun.
nowadays.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. Feel your body and then share your opinion.
From Socratic to somatic.
Ken,
That's
you better
awesome.
trademark that pretty quick. I think that's
Honestly,
gonna
I
good
know.
on that.
Maybe I should.
Good
A new
idea.
word for like
No one
group
take that.
therapy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Ken,
That's
Lara,
awesome.
any final questions for Joy?
I don't think so. I loved this. This was great. Getting called into work was not the best part of the day, but this is a good part of the day. This pod.
Good.
I don't have any questions, but just thank you for putting up with some of ours. And I just want to say
Yeah.
you're so easy and kind to talk to, and I just am excited to see kind of what you choose to do.
Aw.
And the next, we'll keep track, set a timer for 3 years, and we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Aw, thank you. That's so kind. Yeah. No, I really appreciated all of your questions. I'm still early. If it wasn't clear in some of my answers, still early on enough in this program that like I'm figuring out like why I'm here to the point of like no accidents, but also like it feels like I just happened upon this program. So it's really, I mean, helpful also for me to like, yeah, appreciate your questions and to practice kind of articulating for myself and also for the sake of like divinity school and how it's being talked about like in the world. I want to give an accurate representation, at least for my experience of what it is. So yeah, the practice of articulating it is really, I think, beneficial. So thank you all.
Okay, Joy, I do have a final question though.
Mhm. Okay.
So on our first pod, which was just the three of us talking about it, and then on our most recent pod with Steph and Emily, we were talking about the difference between religion and faith. And I am so curious about your opinion on what is religion, what is faith, where is their overlap? Are they the same thing? Are they totally, completely different things? I think your perspective on this would be really, really interesting. I'm also sure that when we talk to you in 3 years, you'll have a totally different
sure.
definition. So
Yeah.
we're acknowledging that now. This is for posterity. It'll be great.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that reassurance. I
You're
feel
welcome.
more empowered to just speak knowing that
Yeah,
I'm allowed to change my mind.
Just go with it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's such an interesting question that I feel like a lot of people, myself included, are trying to figure out and kind of grapple with. Here's where I stand right now. In
Just a moment
September
in time. It's okay.
of 2022. I guess to me, it feels like, yeah. I guess the first place my mind went to is like, why does it like, sometimes it feels like it's kind of semantics and I get kind of caught up in trying to differentiate those two. And I kind of question like, why sometimes like it feels like it's a little bit of a distraction for me, like in the way that I use those words. But that's kind of an aside, I guess, from a sort of, like, the perspective of thinking about how I'm talking about it with other people, not just in my own definitions. I think to me, it feels to me that religion is more, it's not that it's more expansive, it's just that it includes a lot of different aspects of human experience. Like something that's religious could be a physical object. It can also be the ritual of attending a certain service at a certain time. It can be songs. Like the religion kind of is a collection of objects and ideas and traditions and rituals. And in that sense, I mean expansive, as in it's a really broad sort of category that includes a lot of different sort of like anthropological things and cultural norms and social norms and whatnot. So that's sort of how I would define religion or religious, is affiliating oneself with a tradition that includes all of what I just mentioned. And I guess to me, faith feels like that's one aspect that somebody who is religious has. But to me, it feels like faith is more, it's operating on a more personal and maybe not collective or communal level, whereas religion exists. I mean, there's a lot of different, I guess, philosophies behind whether or not this is true, but religion exists because the community supports it and agrees that it does and sort of decides to perpetuate it. Whereas faith feels like it can be more of a sort of personal story that we tell ourselves or way of making sense of the world. And it doesn't have to include the different objects and questions that a religion does, but it can, but it doesn't have to. So yeah, I don't know. I'm clearly still thinking through it a lot, but yeah. But I guess to me, those are sort of the key differences. I think faith can be sort of played out in a communal context also, and that can just be faith even when it's communal. That doesn't necessarily make it sort of religious. Yeah, that's my answer.
That was a good answer.
Well, yeah,
Good.
I feel like it's, like the sign of understanding something well is being able to describe it in like a few words, and it's like an essay later. So
That was our whole conversation, and then someone would say something and be like, yeah, no, that fits with mine too. Like we just had
Yeah, there's a lot of learning on this.
There's a lot of learning to do, because there's also the question of spirituality. Like, I think a really common thing that people talk about now is spiritual but not religious. People don't say faithful but not religious. So there is this sense that like faithful or faith is wedded to religion in a way that spirituality can be but isn't necessarily. I think that gets to the point originally of like, in some contexts it's like beneficial to parse those things out, and sometimes it feels like maybe, yeah, like the definition is very elusive and not helpful in my own practice. But I do think it's an important to kind of clarity on, because when we talk about these things publicly for a political or sort of a social end, it kind of matters. The words matter. Yeah. But it's interesting. I'm curious what the other people, you don't have to tell me now, but just like in general, I'm just curious what other people have said, just rhetorically, because people, I feel like, always have different answers to that.
Yeah, I'm sure if we asked 50 different people, they would all say very different things. I feel like our answer was that you can have faith in things that are not even religiously affiliated. Like I can have faith in myself, or I can have faith that nature will continue to play out in a way that will be aligned with, what nature needs. Whereas I feel like there's not as much of like an ability to be secular with with religion, like the term religion. But I liked what you said about faith being a part, like there being a bunch of different categories underneath religion and faith being one of them. I think that is really true. But then I also think you can take faith out, to your point, and also have it be more of like a secular faith in maybe yourself, or your like belief in the strength of family, or whatever it ends up being. So yeah. And I also think it's a great point that sometimes it's only so helpful to define things. I think sometimes it can complicate things, but I do agree that the times that I feel like the definitions are most important are when like people's like lives or votes or like beliefs are on the line, and like you need to know what people mean by these terms. But obviously we're not in that case right now. But that really got me thinking.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing those other answers. That's really interesting. I hadn't even thought about using faith in like, I have faith in you. Like, when you're carrying something
But it's
heavy.
just
Like
a
I didn't
word.
think about that.
Yeah.
It's just a word, but also
Yeah.
it's like a really important word.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah, definitely I'm just like thinking through for myself, like when do I define something, when I don't, not to say that like categorically it's not a good practice to do that, more just like, yeah, it's a difficult thing, especially with questions of like religion and stuff of like, so oftentimes I get really tripped up on the semantics, and it feels like in religion sort of like public presentation, it's hard to talk about it sometimes because there's so much disagreement around evangelical, like what does that word even mean? And it's like if we can all get on the same page of what we're actually saying, like so much just gets lost in translation because none of us, it's not that we don't know what we're saying, it's just that it's interpreted really differently on the other end.
Yeah, totally. I think that's all I have. Anything else, Ken, Lara?
I feel good. Thank you so much.
Thank
Joy,
you so much.
this was such a
so
pleasure.
fun.
Thank you so much for coming on and for all of your insightful and really thoughtful answers. I think it's important for you to remember that like your job right now is to be like reflective, like literally your job. So I think it's
exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, it is sometimes. We had someone on the pod last week, Steph, and she's Jewish, and she was talking about how sometimes she wishes that like Judaism had more like defined answers, because she was like, I love that they're so like thoughtful and reflective, but sometimes I'm like, come on, we just need some clarity here. So I can imagine at some point you're going to be like, I just need some clear lines. Like what is good? What is bad? Like, come on.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. That's exactly. Yeah, very much
well,
that way.
Anyway, thank you, Joy, for coming on, and we'll slot you in for 3 years from now.
It would be so fun. Cool.
But
yeah, thank you all. It was so fun. I really appreciate you indulging me processing a lot of these thoughts out loud, because they're really just like stream of consciousness. So thanks for bearing with all of that too.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay.